In this video, I'd like to discuss practice. What works for me, what's worked for my students, and also look at some common myths and practice routines that are suggested and some success stories that might help you if you're feeling a little bit uninspired or you want to kind of get into learning jazz properly. Then hopefully some of the tips in this video will help you get started and remain focused when learning. Most of my work is around jazz education, so most of the things that I'm going to be talking about here are related to jazz. And from my experience, besides teaching jazz, I've actually done a lot of general guitar teaching over the years, and jazz is challenging to learn. So I just want to start by getting that out there. I think it is a challenging genre because unlike general guitar playing, I used to have students that basically could get, I mean, these were like exceptionally good students, but a few students that got really good within maybe 6 months to a year. They could play kind of all the standard advanced guitar repertoire. Whereas jazz, even people that are natural to music and really kind of pick it up quick, I find that there's often more steps and more things to learn in jazz. Obviously, you know, there's theory, there's technique, there's transcription. So to become a well-rounded musician, it does take commitment and time. It's not something that no matter how good you are, you can instantly get good at least from, you know, the people that I've worked with and from my own experience. It's definitely been a lot of graft and a lot of hard work. So how do we get started with that? If we're talking about practice routines, the only type of practice routines that I seem to be aware of when I began learning were these practice routines that would give you like 7 or 8 different things to practice, like chords, reading, improv, learning tunes, all these different things. And they would be like spread out across maybe an hour, 2 hours, maybe even longer practice routines. And they would basically say things like do 10 minutes of reading, 10-minute warm-up, 10 minutes of chord studying, 10 minutes of improv. And to be honest, that never really worked that well for me, and it's not really a method that I use with students. The only exception that I can think to that type of practice routine working is basically someone that's a music student. If you are a serious music student and you've got like at least 3 or 4 hours every single day to practice, then that could potentially work well. And obviously you can look at doing that in a few different ways. You wouldn't necessarily have to do all those elements in one day. I used to have a friend and he would work on certain things on certain days. Like he would have Wednesday as being a scale day. He would work on his reading and stuff on another day of the week. So although I haven't really had much success with that method, I think it can work, but certainly not with most of the students that I work with at least. Before we begin, I think we should actually define what practice is, because everyone always says to practice, but practice basically means 2 different things in my experience. You're either practicing something or learning something. So if we use, say, I don't know, a chord melody or something like that as an example, you obviously have to learn the chord melody first, which means, you know, working it out technically on your instrument. But once you can play through it, then you want it to become fluent, you want it to become second nature. That's when you have to practice it. So there is 2 different types of things you've got to do there. Knowing what to practice is actually a fairly simple, straightforward question to answer. I answer it in just a page or 2 on my free beginner guide. What is challenging is sticking with it and committing to it, because as I said in the beginning of the video, jazz is a challenging style of music and it takes months and years to really progress with. A good way to think of this is to basically compare it to a diet. There's various different diets that work and get you good results, but the ones that really work and give you long-lasting effects are the ones that you've got to stick with, and they're lifestyle changes. That's basically what all good diets will tell you, that you can't just go on a crash diet. You've got to stick with one for months and years, and it's got to be a lifestyle change. Like when you learn jazz, it's not just kind of a one-stop solution. You've got to keep learning and pushing yourself to continuously improve. And sometimes with most of these diets, I find that the answers are pretty much straightforward in terms of what you actually have to do to lose weight. You effectively have to watch what you eat. And knowing that answer is very simple, but the hardest part is sticking with it. Throughout my teaching experience, I basically encountered 3 main types of practices, which are these. The first type of student is either completely in or completely out. So what I mean by that is they're in it, they're practicing all the time, they're learning, really enjoying it, really full on, really devoting themselves to learning the process. But these, unfortunately, are the type of students that also burn out. They will really kind of go at it with, the foot on the gas pedal for a couple of weeks, couple of months, and then nothing. Like, they won't even touch a guitar, and they'll just get completely disinterested in the subject of practice and learning because they've kind of gone full throttle for the first couple of months. So, this can work, and I think that, that there is some pros to that in that you can learn a lot quite quickly. But the problem is that if you do stop playing, then it can be very hard to get back into it, because what you're doing initially is forming that habit, and then once you break that habit, it can be quite hard to get back into it again. Once you started with it and once you're in the routine, it's very easy to keep it going. So that's the first type of student, is the all in, all out. The next type of student is the one that just practices but doesn't really learn. This often tends to be the student that makes it to intermediate or advanced level. They can play pretty well, but they're content and they're not really too fussed about learning much of anything new, so they basically just practice what they know. And maybe, you can improve like that as well. If you keep playing what you know, as I said in the beginning, it's obviously going to improve. However, you're not really learning new material, new techniques, and you're just kind of staying at one level. So, that can have its advantages, and it's often better than not playing at all. But there are a few flaws with that type of student. The last type of student that I'd like to discuss is the one that learns all the time but never practices or seldom practices. So if you think about it, if you're serious about learning something, that's great, because in the beginning there's often a lot of intake, especially if it's something like jazz. You've got the theory side of things, the technique side of things, and the transcription side of things. Tunes, technique, and transcription are the three things that most focus on when they start learning jazz. So there's a lot to learn. However, what can sometimes happen is a student is focused on learning so much that as new stuff is coming in, the old stuff gets neglected and goes out or becomes weak. So it's quite important that you address that. But some people are just always kind of focused on learning something new without really having a good technical command of what they've learned in the past. So as you're probably starting to gather, the ideal student would have traces of these different elements, but the best way, I think, especially if you're looking at getting started, is to really think about this in terms of being a daily routine, something that you do day in, day out. And there's a couple of ways that you can get this into your daily routine to make it a little bit easier, and I'll share those with you now. The first thing that you can do is to try and practice for just 5 minutes every single day. That's all you need to do. 5 minutes, 10 minutes max. Commit to that. Commit to doing it every single day. If you're busy and you want to do this, then you can always find 5 minutes. Even if you've got more time, then 5 minutes is a good way of doing it, because what you're doing there is actually setting up the habit, which is very, very crucial, is setting up the habit so it's something that you just do, like exercise or brushing your teeth. You're setting up a commitment to do this every single day. And if you only set yourself the goal of doing it 5 or 10 minutes, there's two positive outcomes to that. The first is that if you only do 5 or 10 minutes and you want to do more, you've got to stop. So when you come back the next day, you're going to keep that motivation riding forward. The second is that 5 or 10 minutes is a very accessible time that you can commit and find. So that would be the first thing that I'd like you to do if you haven't done that before. And that is from a book called Atomic Habits, which is well worth checking out, because the second point is also from that. The second point is to always keep a guitar nearby. Make it easy to practice. So if you've got a guitar and you usually have it in the case, you have to go and take it from one room to another, plug an amp in, all these other steps, then that can actually hinder your practice. You want to make it as easy to pick up a guitar and play, and that's why you can see that in my living room here, there's the sofa behind me, and to that side of me, there is a guitar. So if I'm ever just sat on the living room, I can just grab that guitar, start playing. I've got no excuses. I always like to have the guitar near the couch so that I can get some practice done, and ideally, if I could, I'd have a guitar in every single room. The opposite to a structured practice routine in which you practice daily is an as and when type of practice routine. And that simply means that you just practice as and when you can, as and when you feel like, and providing that this isn't like once every 6 months or every 3 months. There is some benefit sometimes. I generally don't recommend it because if you can't get it into your routine, it makes it less consistent with the results that you get over time. However, there has been a few exceptional circumstances in which students have actually produced some kind of really good result with this, so I can't deny it completely. Like, for example, I remember back when I was in college, a friend of mine, a really good guitar player, learned the song Joy Spring, which is a difficult bebop head. If you've never heard Joy Spring before, it's a challenging bebop theme. And, you know, most people will probably take a couple of days on that, maybe a week or two, whatever, to try and get it fluent under the fingers. However, this one student literally stayed up all night. We had to play this in a lecture the next morning, and this student stayed up learning this song until 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, and he could play it really well. So although I don't recommend that, I can't deny that that doesn't get you results, and I've definitely been guilty of that myself, where a couple of days might go by where I've been busy, and then I'll just kind of, sink in 2 or 3 hours and then not touch a guitar barely for a couple of days afterwards. So that can work, but generally speaking, I find it much easier to have it as part of your daily routine. The very last point that I'd like to share with you is that you hear a lot about having to practice. You have to practice. You must practice. You need to practice. While that's true, a better way to think of that is that you get to practice. You have the opportunity to practice. It's a privilege to practice and learn. I think that's almost a better mindset to take rather than thinking that you have to do something, because for most of us, if you have to do something, it can have the opposite effect and make us not want to do that. Like, for example, at the time of recording this video, I'm actually going away out of the country in a week or two, and I won't be able to practice and I won't have a guitar for a couple of weeks. So now my mindset is completely changed. I'm thinking that I really want to practice and I really want to get as much in before I go, because I won't have the opportunity in a week or two's time. So that's what made me think of this point. What I think is worthwhile doing is to try and get that mentality in your mind, so that even if you're just practicing normally, not thinking that I have to do this, thinking that you get to do it, because you never know what the future holds, and you never know what problems, hopefully none of us will have health problems or anything like that that might not make that happen. But while we can still play and while we can still hold the guitar, I think it really is an opportunity. To finish off this point, I'd like to share with you 2 quick stories that really inspire me to this day, which are actually from former students of mine. These are their stories really, but I remember them. I'm not even sure if the students will remember these. So when I first began teaching, I used to teach guitar in a school, in an academy, and there was one student that was very, very dedicated. He was a teenager and he was just playing all the time. Like, his fingers were on the guitar neck as soon as he got home from school until he went to bed. Anyway, he came for a lesson with me one day, and he brought his guitar to the lesson in a massive, oblong, big Fender-style case. Anybody that's ever had a Fender will know what I mean. They're awful, big, cumbersome cases which are completely unnecessary. So anyway, he gets his guitar out, we have the lesson, and usually his dad would come and pick him up or drop him off to help him with the heavy guitar, but in this particular occasion, his dad couldn't come and pick him up, and the plan was that his dad was going to drop by later and pick his guitar up to avoid his son carrying the cumbersome case all the way home. So anyway, as we're finishing up the lesson, I can see that this particular student has got his guitar in his hand. So I said to him, your dad's going to come later and take the guitar home for you so you don't have to carry it. And then the student's response to me was, yeah, but if I take it home now, I get to practice. And I thought, wow, that's really motivating to me, that he'd rather lug this massive case with his guitar in so that he can practice as soon as he gets home. The second example is another student who actually chose to stay at home rather than go on holiday with his family. He was a bit older, so he could stay at home by himself because he wanted to practice and improve on the guitar. That's how much he valued the opportunity and the privilege of learning. That concludes the practice points in this video. I hope that you found them useful and valuable. I'd love to know what you think about practice routines. Do you practice? How do you like to do it? What kind of student are you? Please let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. And if you like this video, please don't forget to subscribe to this channel.